He thought it was just a joke, a smirk, a jab, a prince trying to be clever in front of the crowd. But what he got was silence. Not the awkward kind, the deliberate kind. The kind that cuts deeper than any comeback. Because the man he mocked, a royal guard, didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't give him the dignity of a response. And in that stillness, something shifted. In front of 100 tourists and a wall of cameras. Prince Andrew got the message loud and clear. Now, before we reveal the full story, first, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. It was one of those London afternoons where the sky tricks you, bright blue, barely a cloud in sight, but the heat still manages to cling like a second skin. The forecourt outside Buckingham Palace shimmered faintly, the black and white paving stones radiating warmth as though the ground itself was holding its breath. Tourists packed shoulder to shoulder behind the rope barriers, sunglasses perched on sunburnt noses, phones raised high, elbows jostling for space. Children clutched Union Jack flags in sticky fingers. Older visitors leaned on canes or railings, and across the crowd buzzed a dozen languages narrating the same hope. To catch something real behind the ceremony. At the gates, 2 royal guards stood motionless in full ceremonial dress, crimson tunics sharp as razors, gold buttons glinting in the sunlight, rifles held with perfect verticality against polished boots. Their tall black bearskin hats added a ghostly grandeur to the scene, casting shadows that concealed expression, emotion, identity. They weren't supposed to be people, they were symbols, living extensions of centuries-old tradition. But one of them was a person, a man with a name, a history, a memory that stretched far beyond this pageantry. Lance Sergeant Dominic Hale, 34 years old, quiet, lean but solid. His face, beneath the hat, was clean-shaven and unreadable, just like it had been during patrols through Helmand Province years ago. Afghanistan had left its mark, but not the kind you could photograph. He didn't speak about it much, didn't have to. The way he carried himself, shoulders always squared, eyes always alert, said more than stories ever could. 6 years in ceremonial service had taught him how to become invisible while being stared at by thousands. How to stand still long enough that time itself seemed to shift around you. But he never forgot that he was also a soldier, and that standing still didn't mean being passive, it meant being ready. Behind him, inside the palace, the pace was different. Structured, intentional, clockwork. The staff moved like a well-rehearsed cast. Groundskeepers, couriers, private security. All of them knew what was coming. A royal motorcade was scheduled for arrival at precisely 14:40. The media had been tipped off. A few outlets were discreetly filming. Tourists had noticed the uptick in visible security. Whispers spread. A prince was coming. Not the most popular one, but still. Royalty. In the far corner of the forecourt, a small group of uniformed officers conferred in tight formation, radios crackling quietly. Their posture wasn't relaxed, neither was Dominic's. He didn't know what would happen when the motorcade arrived. Truthfully, he wasn't expecting anything, just another appearance, another day playing statue for the crown, another round of photos, jokes, maybe a few taunts from tourists testing the limits of his discipline. But what none of them, neither the crowd nor the cameras nor the prince himself, understood, was that Dominic had already been through worse, and he'd never flinched. The Rolls-Royce turned onto the gravel drive, the crowd reacting with a collective murmur of interest. A few children climbed onto their parents' shoulders. Phones went up like periscopes. Sunglasses were adjusted, elbows nudged. The motorcade was here. And behind the gates, unmoving, unblinking, Dominic Hale stood exactly where he'd been told to stand, ready. The black Rolls-Royce eased to a stop just past the gilded gates, its glossy bodywork mirroring flashes from every direction. A uniformed doorman moved briskly to open the rear door, and out stepped Prince Andrew, Duke of York. He adjusted the cuff of his navy suit, offered a faint wave to the crowd, and flashed the kind of smile that once played better in the press. But today, the response was mixed. Some tourists clapped dutifully, others lowered their phones. A few exchanged hesitant glances. He was no stranger to scrutiny. Not anymore. Andrew carried himself with the same entitlement that had defined him for decades. Shoulders back, chin high, strides deliberate. But even that confidence didn't hide the tension in his jaw or the guarded way his eyes swept the crowd. He knew how the world looked at him now. Still, he played the part. He strolled toward the center of the forecourt, flanked by security, acknowledging scattered applause. A palace aide leaned in, murmured something, gestured toward the main entrance. But Andrew paused. His gaze had landed on the two motionless royal guards stationed just beyond the main flagstones. He turned toward them with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Still as statues, aren't they?" he called out, loud enough for the nearby tourists to hear. "Bet you lot dream of air conditioning and early retirement." A few people chuckled, nervous laughter, unsure. Dominic Hale didn't move. Prince Andrew took a few more steps toward him, one hand casually resting on his hip, the other swirling a pair of sunglasses by the hinge. "Funny, isn't it?" he continued, voice lower now, but still audible. "They never say a word. Makes you wonder what's really going on behind those dead eyes." His tone carried that offhand cruelty, the kind used by men who had never been told to stop. He wasn't speaking to Dominic, not really. He was performing. For the cameras. For the crowd. Maybe even for himself. Dominic's breathing remained steady. Chin level, rifle held in precise alignment with his body. Then the prince leaned closer, just enough to ensure only Dominic and a few nearby guests could hear him. "Still pretending you're relevant?" he muttered. "Even your brother couldn't keep the act together." A silence followed that no one could quite explain, the kind that makes people glance sideways instead of forward. A tourist guide in a green vest shifted uneasily. A mother pulled her daughter closer. Somewhere behind the rope line, someone stopped recording and simply lowered their phone. Dominic didn't flinch, not a blink. But inside, his thoughts moved with clean precision. He registered every word, filed them, measured their weight against all the things he'd learned in uniform. How to absorb impact without breaking formation. How to carry grief without letting it show. His older brother, Owen, had worn the red before him, had stood on these very stones, had died in a transport convoy attack in Lashkar Gah. His name wasn't in the papers, but his blood was still in the gravel halfway across the world. Andrew's voice had touched something he didn't understand. Behind the prince, a child's voice rose from the crowd, curious, innocent, too loud to ignore. "Mummy, why is that man being mean to the soldier?" The mother hushed her gently, but the moment had already shifted. More people noticed now. Noticed the imbalance in posture, the guard standing with dignity, and the royal moving with irritation masked as charm. A palace staff member approached cautiously, offering Andrew a polite nudge back toward the red-carpeted entrance, but the prince waved him off. "You know," he said, louder again, turning back toward Dominic, "there's something a bit tragic about all this. All these traditions and no one left who remembers why they mattered." Dominic's eyes remained locked forward, unfocused in that ceremonial way they're trained to hold, somewhere between discipline and dissociation. But if someone had been watching closely, very closely, they might have seen it. Not a twitch, not a shift. Just a slight narrowing of the eyes, half a breath deeper than the last. A silence that wasn't neutral anymore. A silence that meant something. From the edge of the crowd, a palace security officer tracked the exchange, saying nothing but watching with a professional's sense of when a moment is becoming something more. Prince Andrew gave a final scoff, shrugged, and turned to walk toward the steps. But the crowd didn't follow him with their phones. They were still looking at the guard, still watching the man who hadn't moved, but had somehow become the center of everything. And in that long, wordless pause, a lesson began to take shape. One not shouted or tweeted or argued. One that was simply stood. For a man like Dominic Hale, stillness wasn't a performance. It was a discipline, a shield, a decision made every second not to move, not to speak, not to react, no matter the weather, the pain, or the provocations. He had spent years refining it, from the barracks in Pirbright to the vast drill squares at Wellington, from muddy training fields to the dust-blown roads of Afghanistan. And now, here, on a strip of London stone where millions walked but few really saw what they were looking at. But this was different. He wasn't on patrol. He wasn't under fire. He wasn't saluting a coffin draped in a Union Jack. And yet, In the quiet that followed Prince Andrew's parting remark, something about the weight of the moment settled on him, like Kit on his back, heavy, familiar. Across the forecourt, the energy had shifted. What had begun as a spectacle, the arrival of a royal, had become something else entirely. People had stopped filming. A few had even lowered their phones altogether, as if holding them up in this silence felt inappropriate. An older couple stood near the railing, hands linked. The man, gray at the temples, his blazer pinned with a single ribbon, watched Dominic with an expression that carried understanding, respect, maybe even gratitude. A woman holding a toddler murmured, "He didn't move, not once," as if she'd witnessed something sacred, and Dominic remained still. But inside, a reel of memory had begun to play. His brother Owen, always the louder one, always the one cracking jokes during inspection, had once said, "Stillness isn't weakness, Dom. It's where real strength lives." He remembered the first time he saw Owen in the red, standing outside St. James's, eyes fixed dead ahead, tourists making faces to break his composure. He'd been 12. He never forgot the awe he felt, the silence it commanded. And later, much later, he remembered standing in formation as Owen's coffin was carried down the tarmac in Bryce Norton. Same stillness, same silence, different weight. So, when Prince Andrew mocked his service, his uniform, his stillness, it wasn't just protocol Dominic was defending, it was memory, family, purpose. Near the rear of the crowd, two teenagers who'd been filming earlier now stood awkwardly silent. One lowered his phone and whispered, "Think he's gonna say something?" "No," the other replied. "He already did." Back near the palace steps, Andrew turned slightly, watching the crowd with a puzzled frown. He didn't seem to realize he was no longer the focus. His attempt at levity had missed its mark, and in doing so, had revealed something he hadn't intended to. That's when Dominic moved, barely. It wasn't a shift in stance or a breaking of form. Just a breath. A small, steady inhale that lifted his chest by an inch. A blink that was almost imperceptible. A fractional lift of the chin. And yet, it was enough. Enough to send a message, enough to draw the crowd's focus back to him like a magnet. Prince Andrew's gaze met his for half a second before he turned away, too quickly, too pointedly. The moment hung there like a suspended cord. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand, but charged. Completely. The stillness now didn't feel like submission, it felt like judgment. A man with nothing to prove, reminding everyone who forgot that dignity doesn't have to shout to be heard. One woman near the front turned to her husband and said, "He didn't say a word, but he said everything." Even among the staff, something shifted. The palace aide who'd earlier motioned the prince forward stood now with his hands behind his back, eyes cast respectfully toward the guard, not in pity, not even apology, but in recognition. And slowly the tourists who had laughed earlier grew quiet. Some nodded, others simply stared, processing the unexpected weight of what they'd just witnessed. Because for all the gold-plated gates and embroidered titles, what lingered in the air wasn't royalty. It was restraint. It was principle. It was a man in scarlet wool choosing not to respond, and in doing so, exposing everything that needed to be seen. Dominic didn't break character, because character for him wasn't something you put on. It was something you stood in. Prince Andrew disappeared into the palace a few moments later, but his departure was quieter than his arrival. There were no cheers, no claps, no camera flashes trailing after him. Only the sound of distant traffic, the rustle of flags in the breeze, and the quiet conversations of tourists who were no longer looking at the building, but at the man still standing in front of it. The ceremony resumed like clockwork. Guards changed positions in silent unison. A trumpet sounded from the west courtyard. Officers stepped through the gravel in polished black boots, their movements precise, their commands soft and clipped. But the air wasn't the same. It felt like the forecourt had been recalibrated. The crowd, once loud and impatient, had fallen into a subdued hush. They weren't just watching tradition anymore, they were watching meaning, in the form of a man who hadn't moved, but had transformed the entire atmosphere through discipline alone. A little boy, no older than 7, broke the line. He stood near the rope, plastic crown lopsided on his head, and lifted his hand into a crooked, earnest salute. His mother gasped and reached to pull him back, but it was too late. Dominic didn't move. He didn't acknowledge the gesture, but the boy's smile widened anyway. Nearby, a veteran in a blazer and beret slowly raised his hand to his chest and gave a firm nod. Not toward the palace, not toward the flag, toward the guard. A woman in her 70s turned to her husband and whispered, "That man's guarding more than gates." By the time Dominic's shift ended, the temperature had cooled slightly. A breeze swept across the forecourt, lifting a few stray pamphlets and fluttering the hem of a child's dress. The bells of the chapel inside the palace struck the hour. The guards began their ceremonial rotation. With practiced precision, Dominic turned, marched 6 steps, pivoted, and moved in time with the other relieving guard. Every footfall was measured, every second accounted for. But now, every eye in the crowd followed him. When he passed the same child who had saluted, the boy tugged his mother's sleeve again. "He's going now." "I know, sweetheart." "Is he sad?" She didn't answer, just crouched and held him a little tighter. Dominic didn't look back. He never did. His path was direct, straight toward the shaded archway that led into the interior court. It was cooler there, quieter, the sounds of the crowd muffled behind the thick stone walls. His boots clicked cleanly on polished tile. At the barracks, the transition was smooth. Helmet removed, rifle checked and secured, gloves folded and placed into a small wooden tray above his locker. But the silence lingered. In the corner of the changing room, a younger guardsman was unbuttoning his tunic when he paused and looked over. "Was that something?" he asked hesitantly. Dominic glanced at him, but said nothing. "I mean, I saw it. Everyone did. Still nothing." The younger man nodded, as if the lack of answer was answer enough. "They won't forget that." Dominic sat down slowly, stretching his legs, rolling his shoulders to ease the weight of the bare skin from his spine. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "We don't need to speak to be understood." That was all. The rest, as always, was silence. 10 minutes later, a palace staffer entered the room holding a folded note. No envelope, no seal. "Sergeant Hale?" Dominic stood, took the paper with a gloved hand, and opened it. It was unsigned, just 4 words, typed in neat black print. "Message received. That'll do." He didn't react, didn't smile, just folded the paper once, placed it into the breast pocket of his tunic, and returned to his seat. Still, composed, grounded. Outside, tourists were slowly dispersing. The show was over, the guards rotated, the prince long gone. But here and there, people remained at the rope line, not filming, not laughing, just standing, as if something sacred had happened, and they were trying to hold on to the feeling for one more moment. Have you ever seen someone say everything without saying a word? And do you think silence can sometimes carry more weight than any argument ever could? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one, and your thoughts make these stories matter even more. If this moment reminded you of the quiet strength behind the red uniform, hit that like button and subscribe for more Royal Guard stories like this one. Don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss our next upload. And if you know someone who thinks these guards are just props in a photo, share this video with them. Let them see what real dignity looks like. Other stories are appearing on your screen right now. Click one, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with a brand new video. You've probably seen them, standing motionless outside Buckingham Palace, dressed in red and black, eyes fixed ahead. To most tourists, royal guards are part of the scenery, statues with rifles, a photo opportunity. But behind every still figure is a soldier, a person, and sometimes a moment that reminds the world exactly what they're guarding. Today's story isn't about confrontation. It's about what happens when royalty underestimates silence, and how one guard's refusal to react said everything. This one will stay with you. Now, let's go back to the moment it all began.